Good. All right. Well, Walker Brandt, welcome to the Conquering Everest podcast. How have you been?
I've been good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I look forward to diving into your story. We had our pre-show conversation a few weeks back, and you've got a lot of energy, and you bring a lot to the table as far as that energy and story goes. So, as we get started, why don't you take a moment, if you don't mind, and introduce yourself to our listeners?
All right. Well, as you said, my name is Walker Brandt. I am an actor and a new author as of 2020. I have been in the entertainment industry for about 30 years. I've shot just about everything, and primarily in recent years, dozens and dozens of commercials and literally thousands and thousands of ads over my career. But mainly that's what I focus on, is ads and commercials now, because it lets me be home with family. I started my career as a model, and then it sort of segued into the entertainment industry, not knowing that's where it was going to go, but it did. And I was in a film called City Slickers, and I was on several TV shows, but Star Trek, most people love that. Trekkies are the best fans ever. So I always say Star Trek because I love the fans. And yeah, so that's kind of my journey. We could go in, different aspects of that. I've had incredible experiences and been able to travel the world. So grateful for that as a result of being in the industry. My book that I released last year, called Awaken: Discovering Yourself Through the Light of Your Innocence, is a memoir. It's a story of how my life started and my journey. And I was just to give a little bit about it. Most people didn't know until last year when I released it that I was a runaway and on my own at a very young age, and emancipated at 16, and taking care of myself from that even earlier than that, but and was able to create this career despite the challenges of that and the esteem that I was dealing with, and all of the the difficulties of feeling like just an unworthiness of having success that comes with starting a life in that way, and needing to to make those kinds of choices at such a young age. And I met several amazing people, but one in particular named Lisa Nichols, who said, "Your story doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the person it can help." And that kind of kicked me in the butt and made me think, I got to get this out. I got to write this. And then COVID happened, and I was like, boy, do I ever need to write this. And I was getting all these little interesting signals. You need to share more of who you are. You need to not be afraid of people judging you, because that's essentially you judging yourself. So I was coming to terms with my own self-judgment, my own self-discrimination, and how that was impacting my life, and showing up in areas where I was just making it much harder to be who I am, and discovering that, oh my gosh, why am I so nervous being me and so unnervous being in front of the camera in front of hundreds of people, or even, seeing myself on TV or whatever. I was totally fine there. But it was like, put me in a room where I have to just sit and talk to somebody, and they asked me about my life, and I was like,
yeah.
I was so afraid to share it. And I just said, you know what? You've been a courageous person your whole life. You have done things that people have admired you for. Why are you choosing not to gift yourself with this freedom? Why are you shackling yourself here? Why are you making this choice? What is it? And so once I asked that question, once it came to the consciousness of I was able to actually see it in front of me, I said, it kind of like inspired that side of me that did leave as a kid to say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't courageous. You got to get out there and do something about it. You got to figure this out. And then people, like I said, started showing up in my life, and they were like people that were like, yeah, they're holding me accountable, And so that in a nutshell is kind of who I am and what my journey is right now. And then there's more to share.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's get into some of that story, the story that ultimately led to this book. And well, first of all, before we do, I just want to say that one of the amazing things about doing this show and it's my favorite part is every guest that I have on, our stories are all different, but there's so many connecting points. When you say you were emancipated at 16, and you said you were a runaway, is that, yeah. So at 16 I wasn't legally emancipated, but I ran off at 16. I started my own life outside of my parents' home, and just things like that. There's always, it never ceases to amaze me on how many connecting points there really is between all of us. I believe all of us in this world, when we do share our stories and we get vulnerable. But let's go ahead and dive into that a little bit. What was life like for Walker growing up?
Oh, well, I grew up in a violent alcoholic family, generationally. It, uh, it was extraordinarily challenging. My mother lived through a very difficult childhood. Her mother lived through challenges in her marriage, and I, know she had some, some challenges in her childhood as well. She had good. Her parents were challenging, but not as in the same ways. It's like challenges evolve, the dysfunctions evolve. So, and how we receive them in different cultural times as our society evolves becomes a different story, right? Even though it's the same theme, there's threads, like you said, connecting points, but there's a difference in the way it's received because it's a result of the culture that we're living in and the family evolution through it. Each generation brings something new to it, if it, whether it be a healing or whether it be more suppression. And that's, so what was going on in my family was continued suppression. And the violence, emotional violence, physical violence, and the alcoholism made it really hard to be home. It made it really hard to be a student, to be in school, to be around people, to not isolate. So I was very fragile in the sense that as a kid, I just was a sensitive person, and a vulnerable person. Like, yeah, all children are vulnerable, but some are more vulnerably natured than others in their disposition. So for me, I became very self-isolating, because it was terrifying for me at home. So I would leave as much as I could and be out in nature. And that's where I discovered some freedom. That's where I started to see elements of myself outside of this place that was unsafe to be vulnerable within, that I would armor myself like a little armadillo. It's like, I don't want to, always protecting myself. But in nature, I felt safe, and I felt a love there, a kindness there, an opening there, an acceptance there, a part of something that was so much bigger than me and embracing me as part of it. And that gave me a sense of myself that I did not feel inside my family because of the boxed in suppression that was part of part of what my family was living through. And some of it was, my stepdad was a Vietnam vet. He suffered greatly. God rest his soul. He just passed in May of this year. And as a result of that war, he went as a very young man and came back as an extraordinarily damaged man without any support. The support that we give our just to go on that subject for a moment, that we give our servicemen is not good now. Back then, during the Vietnam War, it was criminal in what they lived through and how he came back. When he described to me after what he had gone through there and the impact it had on him. And I said, what was it like being discharged when you came home? He said, well, they flew us home and he named the big jets where they carry the big armaments, the big ones we see on movies. And they bring you to the base and you pack your gunny sack and they bring you to the bus station. You get a ticket home. There's no decompression. There was no talking about it. Nothing beyond what you experienced with your brothers that you talked about, but no decompression. So he had such pain that was just held in, held in, held in, and that was his nature, to hold things in anyway. Speaking of the different natures we have, his nature was containment. And so it was, and then explosion. So he would be very controlled and then very violent. And that was, the very base need for us to feel safe was just non-existent as a kid. So that was what I sought, is safety, security. And by the grace of God, I was given it in nature. And that's where I started to determine who I was and started to see myself outside my family as somebody that could have something different. And it was very unconscious instinct at that time in my life. And then it became a little more conscious as I got older. I realized that I needed to do the work. There was something inside me that said, okay, this doesn't just happen. Life isn't just like it's happening to her. There's a responsibility that this is gonna take some work, because you're seeing everybody as a threat.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, they're not. This is because of that. And it's because of the first family that you were in was a threat, but that doesn't mean everybody, your whole family, because I feel the same as you. We are one big family, and that not everyone is a threat. There is an energy that we share, and we can sense when people are at different places and they may not be the safest energy. And we need to listen to that. It's just like in nature, you come across a rattlesnake, don't move quickly. It's going to strike,
Don't run.
Don't run. You see a bear, get big, back up. There are certain things you do in certain kinds of energy, and being aware of that is so important. And it's a responsibility to ourselves to engage and understand that and connect with that. Like you said, these connections are so broad.
Let me ask you a question. So once again, more of your story I can really resonate with. So would you say that you were an insecure child? Did you have lots of insecurities to where, because as I think of it now, you're an actress, you put yourself out there, you modeled, you put yourself out there. What was your, how did that, it took me a very long time in my life to regain some sense of, I guess, courage, because I was so insecure from my childhood and the things that happened. So for you, especially leaving the home at 16, did you know at that point in time that what you wanted to do with your life, or were you struggling with identity?
Oh, I definitely struggling, definitely. So I love that you brought up courage, because this was an interesting dynamic for me, discovering my own courage, where I was really courageous and where I was frightened, and where my insecurities, discovering where they were. Because like I was saying before, in nature, I had immense courage. I would catch rattlesnakes. I'm not kidding you.
Yeah, we had this talk, because I'm the one that's scared of snakes. So yeah.
Yes, and I would catch them. I would catch all manner of snakes. Animals weren't afraid of me. I wasn't afraid of them. They knew I wasn't going to hurt them. I never had a snake coil at me and want to attack me. I've been in caves with them and napping, and found out there was one just not far from me. So I didn't have because I seek cool spots. So I didn't have a fear in that way, where that was where I had really big courage as a kid. I catch big alligator lizards as I was holding him. It was this big as a little kid. My mom would freak out because I'd bring him home and she'd take that thing outside. But yeah, so I had this understanding that their courage was in me, and that I could do things that were and I was very physical as a kid. I climbed trees super, super high. I had no fear of heights, jump and play with the boys. And I was very much a tomboy. And as a girl, that developed a lot of strength and courage and self-awareness and confidence in my being. And so when I entered into the entertainment industry, yeah, it was like, okay, I would call that up. But the insecurities where they were with me were about when people wanted to know more about me, that's when it would come up, and it was profound. There were times, and I write about it in the book, where some things would trigger me and I would just go into a trance because it was so deep, fear and insecurity in that space, not trusting or knowing if I could manage it. I didn't know what the pressure was coming. I couldn't consciously label what it was, but it was a perception and a feeling that would just come up, and an insecurity, an overwhelming insecurity. And I would just back away, and I would move the other direction, or just tune out and disengage, and not know exactly why I'd get, but because it was a trigger that was from a time when I was so young that it created a pattern in there. And going out into nature, I would connect with nature, but I wasn't conscious enough or intellectually capable or emotionally capable to understand what it was that I was hurting so badly from, that was causing these fractures of identity and of security and self-understanding. It was that kind of a thing. So yes, I struggled with that. I still, at times, when I'm challenged to up-level myself in a circumstance that's been a life work, such as outside in instead of inside out, self-validation, something comes up like that. And it's like, oh, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? I'm needing something from the outside to make me feel better about myself. Okay, that's outside in. I'm aware enough to know that that's working on me right now, because it's causing this discomfort. It's causing my identity not to feel solid for me, not to feel comfortable in myself. I know enough now, but there were periods in my life in my 20s and 30s where I was like, gosh, who am I? And then I reached this point, and being in a business where I could take on roles of other characters and just be there, so committed, so comfortably, because it wasn't me, but I would endow them with these dimensions deeply. And I loved that craft and that work, because it allowed me to be somebody else, not fully having to reveal myself. But there was a point where those two things kept moving together, and I didn't really know it was happening, but I got to the bottleneck where I couldn't get away with that anymore. And my authenticity, I didn't feel authentically myself. I couldn't dive in as deep as I could into the work. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? I feel like an imposter, the imposter syndrome. I felt like I was a fraud. I felt like I was, I told one of my acting coaches one time, and I just adore him so much. I was in a class, and his name was Larry Moss, and he's like, he's a brilliant teacher. And I said, I feel like a fraud. And he said, you're not a fraud. Trust me, I know. Just keep doing the work. You're dealing with some deep stuff. Just be prepared, do the work, stay ready, keep evolving. And, it's just a beautiful soul that way. And so that's big work. And like Uta Hagen, another brilliant coach, says, if you're somebody who really commits to the work of being an actor, you ought to be a really well-adjusted person when you hit your 40s, 50s, if you've been doing it since you were in your 20s, because the work demands it. It demands you get in touch with your identity through the identities of other people that you're developing. If you've got some crap going on in there that's pulling you away from who you are, you're going to have to face it. You're going to have to face it.
And it's interesting. So I've always had this, I've never had a desire to be an actor, but that a lot of that was probably my insecurities. And so I never really gave it a thought because I didn't think I could do it. But one thing that fascinated me was hearing stories about method actors and how they would totally absorb themselves into a character to really get the true essence of that character. But sometimes they walked out of that moment in time completely changed. I remember reading something about Heath Ledger when he was preparing to be the Joker, and he just, kind of isolated himself. And when he came out, he wasn't the same guy. And so I've always had this theory in my mind that if you really want to change who you are, become a method actor. But what I'm hearing from you is the real you is always like, that piece of you that from your childhood, from the traumas, that's going to be lingering around, even though you may put on a mask and wear a different personality for a while. Eventually it's going to bubble up and come through, and you're going to have to come face to face with it. Like, so I think you just poked holes in my theory that, become a method actor to be anybody you want, because you can change your personality, but it doesn't sound like it's quite that easy.
It's not quite that easy, but I love that you brought this up, and you brought up Heath, because he was a beautiful soul and a pinnacle moment for me because I started method, and it scared the crap out of me because I would come out. I mean, I loved it. It was like an addiction. This is why it scared me, because it was like an addiction for me, because I would go so deep into this character that I could get so far away from myself. And it felt so good. But when I came out of that role, it took me longer and longer to shed it, because I was running from myself. And I felt that that wasn't going to work. And I felt that if I kept doing this, that there was a hollowing happening. There was a void. And it was an instinctual thing, Walker. I literally had this conversation. And when Heath Ledger passed, I knew why, because of that work, because of being a method actor, because of the characters. And it's interesting you bring this, there are no mistakes, such synchronicity. I was just having this conversation yesterday, because life is a visualization in many, many ways. It is a dream. We start with an idea, a dream, something we want to do. You could liken it to a dream or a visualization or a thought that you start seeing, and then you start moving toward it. You start taking actions. And if you were to see where you are right now and then go backwards, how'd you get there? You will see all these moments that you visualized, that you took steps toward it. And that's very much, and there were intentions, and you moved through conflict, and you kept superseding conflict. And this is the superseding of the conflict is what kept you interested and kept you moving forward and kept you intentional. This is craft. And so as an actor, when you do that, you are essentially, and the mind not knowing the difference of the imagination and reality, you can blur those lines to a great deal. So when you're creating and working through a character as dark as the Joker was for him, and if you have issues of any kind that you have not worked through, anything from your childhood, anything from your young adulthood, anything that you're judging yourself for, anything that you're feeling insecure about, anything that you haven't gone inside out from, and you're in that world with that pressure from all the people representing you, your fans, the business asking of you, and you don't have that inside out foundation, you're going to turn to drugs, you're going to turn to alcohol, you're going to fall into that big giant space, that canyon. And if you're lucky, you'll be at the bottom and you'll scratch yourself to the top. It's emotional for me because I know so many actors that suffered this. We know so many actors that have left this world because of this, because they couldn't, because of the pressure, because of not wanting, because the kind of judgment I understand that I can relate to, not wanting to share your story, not wanting to come, because everybody's seeing you as this thing, and it becomes a world of, they see me as this, I can't go against it. I can't tell them that I'm falling apart inside. I can't tell them that I can't shed this character. I can't tell them that that this has become too hard for me, because then somebody's going to step in and take my place. There's just so much pressure that an actor of his talent and his level, just like Philip Seymour Hoffman, this level of genius that people have and the connection they have to, and they want to be challenged into their darkness, because this is what we're, this binary, beautiful experience of light and dark, and being challenged by it is the conflict of life. It's the keeping us here. It's wanting us to evolve and go through it that draws us here. And it's a beautiful thing, and it's a terrifying thing. And the beautiful part of the industry that I wish was more responsible at times is being able to mimic life and share stories that are so special and so deep that give us a look into the life of people so that we can see ourselves in there and let that judgment go and grow through who these people are in their just authentic, who they are people, like, you know, Kate Winslet and Mayor of East Worker, I can't remember the name of it, sorry, apologize for that, but it's a series she did. It's on HBO, I believe. And, you know, she just plays a character that's just so raw and real and relatable and mistakes. And she's making all these mistakes right and left. And then she makes these amazing, powerful choices. And isn't that what we are? Isn't that what we are? And we spend so much time racking our identity and telling ourselves we need to be this and we need to be that. And it's just okay to be as fragile as we are in those moments, as strong as we are, as raw as we are, as great and beautiful and genius as we are. And just be okay with that in those moments. Give ourselves the time we need to take a break and be okay with who we are and not receive all that pressure. That's a hard thing to do in your 20s and 30s. And we lose people, sometimes in your 40s too, and sometimes for life. And
did you find yourself coming from a home that that did struggle with addiction, alcohol? Was there drug addiction as well, or was it? So, I mean, coming from that environment,
overdosing, yes.
Oh, yeah. So at 16, when you found yourself independent and on your own, did the allure of alcohol and drugs creep into your life, or were you able to stay a couple steps ahead of that? And I guess what I mean by that is, so alcoholism does come from my family, drug abuse does come from my family, but I never turned to drugs and alcohol. My vice, my addiction was attention. But it was funny because growing up, I was super introverted and shy, but I always looked for one person that I could latch onto for a period of time, and they would fill me up with whatever it was I was searching for. I guess love. And then eventually that would fade, and then I would go and jump into the next relationship looking for it. So I became addicted to the relationship, and I think in some ways I still am. But for you, what was that like for you, coming out of that and still starting your life, becoming successful, but still dealing with the trauma?
Well, to share just a little bit on the drug addiction, I had big drug problems when I was really young. I started using cocaine and alcohol at 13, 14. And then when I left 15, I was, every chance I got, I was using something. My parents weren't around, I was sneaking alcohol. I was numbing myself during those years to just be in the environment whenever I could. And I would sneak out and I would go drink with friends and weekends and, you know, so I used a lot then. Once I left home, I was on my own. I had to work, I had to survive, I had to feed myself. I did not have that. I knew you can't do this. You can't do this. There's no hiding. You gotta, you know, I couldn't go to work drunk. That just wasn't in my core system to do that. I felt like, okay, I got to do my best wherever I go to work. So I had this built-in ethic. But I did become like a weekend binger for a period of time. I did. And exactly the same thing as you have with relationships. 100% did the same exact thing. I found myself in relationships that were feeding something the attention. I imagine that's why I accepted being an actor as well, because I didn't think about doing it. But once I got the attention, and, you know, and as a model, you know, even though I found the modeling part of it profoundly boring. And I was always creating characters for my modeling. My agent was like, I'm just going to nickname you the chameleon because you just like not one picture looks the same. And she's like, why is that? You're just like, I was like, because I get bored and I just start thinking about different, people and things. And so when she got the call about City Slickers, and she was like, oh, I know who's going to be the actor because they wanted a model. And they wanted a real model. And she was like, oh, I have a model that's really an actress. I'm going to send her. So, but in my 20s, well, all throughout my life up until my 40s, my relationships were very much that. It was this finding love always, wanting to, love was my priority. I wanted to know love. And then the attention thing that I was getting from being an actor and a model, not so much as the model, but as the actor. That's when I recognized, when I was talking about that cavern, that canyon that was being built between myself and the work I was doing, the characters, and not being able to shed them. I also recognized that this attention is very addicting, and I am wounded. And then I started looking into the history of actors, and I started seeing the statistics, and I started seeing people reading memoirs and histories, biographies about people like Marilyn Monroe and people that were so wounded and became really famous, or other people that were wounded and became famous or somewhat famous and didn't deal with their issues. And they just ended up being so damaged or ended up in institutions or on drugs and alcohol. And everybody in my family, all my siblings, had turned to drugs and alcohol. I was the only one that didn't as an adult. And so, but for the weekend, but even for the weekend, I can count only 3 times in my life where I blacked out because I was so afraid of losing control, so afraid of being like my family, so afraid of what could happen if I lost control. Who would I be? That I just didn't want to. So that's how I managed it. And then as I went through periods where I didn't touch alcohol. I went through sobriety periods. I went to Al-Anon. I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to all different manner of treatments and meetings and education, to therapy, Jungian, and all different kinds of modalities to peel back and figure out how that addiction couldn't like sneak in and draw me to something, that I could be more conscious with it. So yes, I understand that, but in relationships, that's what took the longest for me to recognize, because we're supposed to be in relationships. Yeah. Love is a good thing, and it is, but the way that you receive it when you haven't received it authentically and in that loving parent way, is it becomes the ideal reflection, the ideal that you set, that I set as what love is. And that drew a specific type of relationship to me over and over again and with each one, I don't know if you went through this, but with each one, I recognized more about who I was, what my core values were, because what always inevitably pulled me out of the relationships was an incompatibility on core values. I didn't really know what my core values were. Consciously, I was always reacting to them, but I couldn't consciously articulate or emotionally define them, because as a kid, my core values didn't mix with my family. They had to be suppressed to just be in that environment. Yeah. So maybe you can relate to that too, is you were different. And so you had to leave. But then it became the discovery that normally happens when we're children in a safe environment at home. The discovery of identity. By the time we leave home, our identity is closer much than it was for you and I, intact. But for me, it was like leaving at 5 when I left at 14 the first time, 13 the first time, 14 the second time, 15 permanently. So I was way behind schedule.
Right. Yeah. And I can totally relate to that. And and throughout my life, it does come, or at least for me, it comes down to those values as well, because I would find myself jumping into a relationship because I felt that love that I was craving. But of course, every relationship kind of has its honeymoon phase. And then eventually you both just get real with who you are, and then once that happens, it gets a little more difficult to accept something, a value that you don't believe in or that you don't live by. And so yeah, it like as you were talking, I'm just like, yeah, that's I can define it to a T. So um well, let's talk about the book. So the book only about a year old now. You said 2020 is when you wrote it, and if I remember right, at the beginning of our conversation, it you decided to write it because people were telling you that, hey, this needs to be out there. When you started writing this book, where were you at emotionally in your life? Were you in a really good place? Were you still trying to overcome the past? Had you already passed that? Like, where were you when you started taking your first, strokes of the keyboard to write the book?
I was in a really uncomfortable combination of all of the above. I was at a point where, okay, I know this, and I know I don't know that, and I know I need to know, but I don't know what that is. And I've got to just open myself up. And I had a breakdown. I had a full-on breakdown. I had been walking through a at that point, almost, well, no, it was 6-year cancer battle with the love of my life. And hardly anyone knew. And it was excruciating. And to keep that hidden. But it was out of respect and the wishes of my soulmate. And so it was, he's the love. And so, it was out of respect. It's what he wanted. And it's exactly what he got, because that's the way it is. When somebody's dealing with something like that, my belief is, as hard as it was, and it was really hard, because I don't suppress in that way. It went against everything inside of me. I knew it was harming myself, but it was also a silver lining harm, because it forced me to acknowledge that I was, and that there was stuff still down there that I hadn't really dealt with. And the potential of losing him brought back a very deep memory when I lost my grandmother, who I had bonded with as a baby. And she was beaten to death by my grandfather when I was 3. And it was the most devastating experience that I have ever lived through, up until losing my best friend in my 20s unexpectedly, and then what I was walking through with my partner in life. And there was the awareness that there is something in my body, as much as I may know up here and I may be aware, there's something that's hiding in there and it's causing me so much pain. And I got to a point where I just didn't want to be here. I was in excruciating pain. I was like, how can I be in this space where I have some understanding, I have some awareness, I've done work, I've created success, I've come a long way, honey. How am I sitting here on the floor and feeling like, just, I can't do this. This life thing is just, wow, it's just really knocking me out. I can't do this, is how I felt. I don't know if I can walk this, because I couldn't define it. I didn't know it was just in my body, because I was only 3. And some of the worst trauma I had seen was prior to 3, with my grandfather beating my grandmother. And I lived through this and I watched this. And so I just contained it, but I didn't know the memories were in there, but they didn't surface. When she did die as a child, I cried year after year after year. It was like it went on for years. My mom didn't have any room for it. She didn't have any space for that kind of pain, because she had her own. And it was like a reflection she could not deal with. So I would get, hit for it. I would get punished for it. And so that created even more suppression. So it wasn't ever a place that could come up in me. Well, it came up in me. It was like a water bottle that had been held under deep. And I put this in the book because it's such a visual that came up in my mind, that filled with air, a gallon water bottle that had been pushed down, 100, 200 feet underwater, and then just released. And it just went up like a flipping rocket. And it shattered me. And that's why it was so overwhelming. I didn't want to, like I said, it was the first time I felt that I didn't want to be here, because the pain was so great. The fear was so great. And then I got through it. I just was on my knees begging and begging, and thank God for my husband. He just was able to be still with me and recognizing that there was nothing he could say. I had to just go through it. And the feelings that he had at that time were so difficult for him, because he was in pain and knowing that he was contributing to this, because he had cancer. And he was like, my gosh, how am I, I can't help my wife is suffering because of me. And I was like, no, I don't want him to think that way. I didn't want to add to his pain, but it happened when it did. And so it was that kind of experience of, this is part of what this book is about. This is part of what this is. This is allowing myself to be this raw, this real, this, and I know that's a term people use, but this is what it is. It's like a wound. It's like, peeling back the onion of who we are, like we all talk about when we do work, peeling back the onion, but inside of that is this heart that has been, bruised, that has been singed in some ways, and it's healed, and it's protected itself for fear of not having it happen again. But you don't get to live in that protection anymore, to be in the world that you want, to be in the world of connected, to be in the world of vulnerability and acceptance, and knowing that we're all a family this way. Your heart needs to be open. So you can't do this anymore. You can't be in that space no matter what it is. You got to let it out of your body. And that's what I kept telling myself, whatever this is. And so I just invited it, and I just made it. I went through that bottleneck, of living through that subtitle of my book, Discovering Yourself Through the Light of Your Innocence, is I gave myself the light of my innocence. I rested in it, and I chose to see everyone that had ever done any harm to me, everyone that had ever done any harm to anyone that I love, in that light, including my grandfather. I had no idea that there was this place in me that had so much terror around him that I was hiding it. It was trapped. And so that's where I was when I had the breakdown. And then after the breakdown, I was surrounded by two friends, Kathleen Seeley. I was at a seminar with her and Jack Canfield, and my friend Heather. And my friend Heather saw me fall apart after, it's like the third day, where sometimes happens in these things. You should bring yourselves into those environments, and you draw them to you because you're ready. And she called Kathleen, and Kathleen came up, and she just is such a gifted spirit. That woman is just a gift to this. We all are. She just was my gift in that moment. She was my angel with my friend, and they held me in their space. They let me walk through it. They just were exactly. I was where I was meant to be, with who I was meant to be with. And they just escorted me through the bottleneck. And then I went home and I started writing it down. I took what I had, and it was like being in a download. I'd never sat so much in my life. Like you said, I have a lot of energy. I have a ton of energy. For me to sit down for 8 months, it was so difficult. And so but I couldn't move. I was just like, I was up at night. I was up at 3 a.m. It was just come through me. I'd be out of bed. I'd be writing. And it was just like letting it out and writing and writing. And yeah, so that's where I was. And then at the end of it, COVID happened. And I kept getting this thing, like you said, this feeling the year before, that we're all this family, we're all connected. And I had this vision that we can no longer, and I had this amazing connection that's also in the book at the beginning, where a friend of mine reached out to me that I hadn't seen in 20 years on Facebook. And we started talking, and I shared with him this vision I had when we were talking in 2019. And I said, I don't think we're all going to be able to gather together in places in groups anymore, unconscious the way we are as in this world, like we're not connected to each other. I just think we're all connected, and we have to know this about each other so that we can stop this living apart from one another, and we can stop labeling each other, third world. And from that, those don't exist. We're a family of human beings. And then COVID happened, and my book was in my final edits with my editor, and I was like, I need to get this done because I needed everybody saying, don't release it now, don't release it now, it's COVID, nobody's going to read it. And I was like, I need to release it because it's all about the unknown, and I just feel like I have to. And so I released it earlier than expected and didn't listen to anyone telling me to postpone it, and released it in March of 2020. And yeah, because I had written it in 2019, and it was just in that process. So yeah, that's what I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. I would think COVID would be the perfect time to release your book because nobody can really, especially in when it really hit the thick of it, nobody could go anywhere. Then
but believe me, lots of people I know, and they're big authors, and they've made a lot of books. All their editors are saying, wait till September, wait till November. Yes, so life for you now, do you feel like you've gotten you were able to heal some of those remaining wounds through your book and what you've been doing since then? Like, do you feel complete, or do you think there's still more to like another book in the process, or in the mind, or what's definitely another book in mind for sure. But I don't necessarily feel like I'm complete. I feel like I have gone to a different level in my experiences, that I invited this. And what I'm doing now, I mean, the people that have come into my life and the collaborations as a result of this, I now co-teach with an amazing woman named Helise Sparky Bridges. She started a company called Blue Ribbons Worldwide, and she downloaded the Who I Am Makes a Difference Blue Ribbon. Did I show you this during our talk?
I don't think so.
I may not have. Okay, so I'm gonna invite you to share this experience with me right now. Okay. So I have a ribbon in my hand. It says, Who I Am Makes a Difference. And I would like to honor you with this ribbon, Brian, because of who you are, just who you are as you are, the way you see the world, courage you have to share the way you see the world, how vulnerable you are, and how that brings it out in others. The way you see connection in all of us it's inviting, and it's comforting. It is a moment to share that isn't always there, and it's something we all need. And I want to honor you for that. And if I were sitting with you right now in front of you, I would ask you if I could place this above your heart, facing up. May I do that virtually for you?
Sure. Yeah.
So I am placing it above your heart, facing up. And on the end of this ribbon are cheerleaders. And the reason it's facing up is because it's facing up to your highest dreams. And the sound that makes dreams come true, and the tradition, is for me to take a spark from my heart and put it into this end of these cheerleaders and say, bing, and ignite through sound that spark in my heart that connects it to yours. And so this woman and I started collaborating in April of 2020. And now we teach a course called Standing Strong Together. It's a community building leadership training certification program online. She had been teaching a version of it in person on a 3-day, in person. So we rewrote it together for the virtual environment. And now we're going into our third session, September 8th. And what's so special about it is it's multi-generational. We have kids in there that are 10, and she's 79, and she has more energy than me, if you can imagine that. She's amazing. And it's just incredible. We're starting Blue Ribbon Cities. Carlsbad was just proclaimed the first Blue Ribbon City. The second is going to be Moose Lake, Minnesota, and the third is Denver, Colorado. These are all launching the next month. And the goal in Carlsbad is there was a student that just graduated, Hannah Katz, who's also a graduate of Standing Strong Together with her brother and her mom. And it's a really incredible story. Her mom met Sparky 30 years ago as a 12-year-old when she was in school, and Grandma Sparky was doing, she was Sparky then, now she's Grandma Sparky. She was doing assemblies in the 80s in schools with that ribbon, teaching kids to end bullying, suicide, and learning how to love and respect one another. She would call kids up and say, if you've been a bully, I want you to come up here. And I want you to say you're sorry. If you've been bullied, I want you to come up here and talk about it and share it. If you've been hurt by something, I want you to get up here and share it with you. Let's heal this together. Let's be together. She was doing it when it was not a popular thing, when it took a lot of courage and she got a lot of rejection. Now the time has come, everybody's ready for this, and more than they've ever been, because kids are a lot more emotionally aware and ready. And schools have finally realized you can't expect a kid to learn academics when they're emotionally suffering. They need to know they matter. They need to know they're cared for. They need to know that somebody wants their voice. And that's what we do, is we value that more than anything, is that all of us have a voice, and that there really isn't an age that separates us. There is no, you're a kid, you don't know nothing, you're an adult, you're too old. There is this beautiful environment that we are in these courses, and the experience is just incredible. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now, is I'm teaching that. Yes, we are talking about co-writing several books, but also our own books that we're writing. And yeah, there's more coming. It's a whole new deal.
Great. You came the closest of all my guests to almost get me to shed a tear. I fight that back on time to time. I should just let it go, but I appreciate that. That was I appreciate it. I got goosebumps, and I don't really have words to describe it, but I thank you for that.
I love that.
And I've got I know I've captured, or I've got some links from you that we're going to include in the descriptions and all that, but just for the sake of kind of voicing them out there, if somebody wants to follow you, connect with you, see the work that you're doing, where would you like those folks to go?
Well, they can go to my website, walkerbrandt.com. They can email me at walker@walkerbrandt.com. All my social links are on my website. I'm primarily on Instagram. I think most of us are at this point. It's so funny. I have Facebook, Walker Brandt Official. And then I have Walker K. Brandt is my Instagram. I've got a Twitter, LinkedIn. So I'm all over. You just Google Walker Brandt, you'll see them all. And I'd love to connect, and I'd love to hear from your audience if they'd like to, say anything about this interview or chat about anything. I'd love to hear from you.
Great. And I've got to go, and I've got to rent City Slickers. That's one of my favorite movies. And now I got to go find you in it, because it's been a while since I've watched it. So now I'm like, she was in City Slickers. So I'm gonna
big
go
giant
find you.
hair. You won't miss me.
Okay.
I have some hair. Bruno Kirby's wife. Yes.
All right. I'm gonna have to go back and why I haven't seen it in a long time, and that was one of my favorites. So I appreciate you taking time out of your busy life to share your story with me and everybody that's listening, everybody that will listen. You are an inspiration to me. I would gladly pay you any amount of money just to sit and take coaching from you every day, because you just, there's so much packed into what you have to say. And
thank you so much, Brian. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. Really, such a great moment in time to share with you today. And I'm just giddy inside. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. And I'm going to look forward to, I'd like to have you on the show again sometime down the road. So I will keep in touch, and we'll kind of follow your journey and see what's next, and have you back on and share it if you don't mind.
Sounds good. I love that.
Thank you much. Hang tight. I'm going to end our recording, but I'll have a little post-show wrap up.